Sheikh's black wife had a secret, then he found out. But he never expected this. The Sheikh was a man of great power and wealth. His life was full of luxury, and he had everything that anyone could ever desire. He was respected by many, feared by some, and admired by all. People saw him as a man who always got what he wanted. His name carried weight, and his presence alone was enough to command attention in any room. Despite his wealth and influence, the Sheikh had always longed for something deeper, something that no amount of gold or power could provide. He wanted love, the kind of love that was pure and unwavering. He had seen many marriages around him, some arranged for status, some for wealth, but he had always desired something different. He wanted a love that was built on true connection, not just duty. Then one day he met her. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. A black woman with a presence so graceful and confident that it left him speechless. She carried herself with dignity, her eyes filled with wisdom, strength, and kindness. She did not try to impress anyone, nor did she need to. Her beauty was not just in her appearance, but in the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, and the way she saw the world. From the moment their paths crossed, something changed within him. He had met many women before, women who admired his wealth, women who desired his attention, women who flattered him with sweet words. But she was different. She did not look at him as just a powerful man. She saw him as a person beyond the wealth, beyond the status. And that was something he had never experienced before. At first, their connection was subtle, like a spark waiting to turn into a flame. They spoke for hours, discussing life, dreams, and fears. The Sheikh found himself drawn to her in a way he could not explain. He admired her intelligence, her strength, and the way she stood firm in what she believed. She was a woman who knew her worth, and that made her even more irresistible. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The more time they spent together, the more he realized that she was the one he had been waiting for all his life. He had fallen in love, truly and deeply, in a way that he never thought was possible. But their love was not without challenges. Whispers began to spread. People questioned their relationship. Some could not understand why a man of his status would choose to be with a black woman. Others believed it was a phase, something that would pass with time. But the Sheikh did not care about their opinions. He was a man who had built his life on making his own choices, and this was the most important choice he had ever made. He proposed to her in the most beautiful way. Under the open sky, with the stars shining above them, he held her hands and told her, "You are the love I have been searching for. Marry me and let us build a life together." Tears filled her eyes, not because she doubted his love, but because she knew the path ahead would not be easy. She had seen the way people looked at them, the way some whispered when they passed by. She knew the battles they would have to face. But in that moment, none of it mattered. She loved him, and that was all that mattered. She said yes. Their wedding was grand, filled with celebration, laughter, and the promise of a beautiful future. The Sheikh was happier than he had ever been. He had found a woman who truly loved him, not for his power or his wealth, but for who he was inside. He believed their love was unbreakable, that nothing could ever come between them. But love, no matter how strong, is always tested. As they started their life together, the whispers did not stop. Some of his family members refused to accept her. Some of his closest allies warned him that he was making a mistake. People who once praised him now questioned his decision. And then, small things began to change. His wife, the woman who had once been so open with him, started to keep things to herself. There were moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought. At first, he ignored it, thinking she just needed time to adjust to their new life. But then little things began to make him wonder. Was she hiding something? The love story that once felt so perfect was about to take a turn that the Sheikh never saw coming. At first, everything about their life together felt like a dream. The Sheikh had married a woman unlike any other, graceful, intelligent, and full of warmth. She had a quiet strength, a beauty that turned heads, and a kindness that made people feel at home in her presence. He felt lucky to have found her. Their love was strong, their home was grand, and their life together seemed perfect. But perfection is fragile. It began with the smallest things, so small that most people would have ignored them. A hesitant pause before she spoke. A flicker of worry in her eyes that disappeared just as quickly as it came. A sigh that felt heavier than it should have. The Sheikh noticed, but he told himself not to overthink it. And yet, he could not shake the feeling that something was off. The late-night calls. The first time her phone rang late at night, he barely registered it. He was half asleep, the soft chime blending into his dreams. She reached for the phone quickly, her movements careful and deliberate. She answered in a hushed voice, slipping out of bed and leaving the room. It was probably nothing. The second time, he woke up fully. The soft glow of her phone screen illuminated her face. He watched as she pressed it to her ear and whispered, "I cannot talk right now." Her voice was tense, rushed. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. She hesitated for half a second before turning to him with a soft smile. "Just an old friend." An old friend. It was a reasonable answer. Logical, even. But why did it not feel that way? Over the next few weeks, the calls continued. Always at night. Always whispered. And each time, she would brush it off with a different excuse. One night, he pretended to be asleep and listened as she stepped out of the room. He waited a few seconds before quietly following. She stood near the window, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping the curtain. "No, not yet," she whispered. "I just need more time." Time for what? He could not hear the other side of the conversation, but her voice was filled with something he could not quite place. Fear? Guilt? Desperation? When she finally hung up, she turned and gasped. He was standing in the doorway, watching. "Who were you talking to?" His voice was calm, but inside, he felt anything but. She swallowed hard, then smiled. "Just my cousin. I did not want to wake you, that is all." A simple explanation. A lie. The lockbox. Then came the box. One evening, while she was out, he entered their bedroom and noticed something new sitting on her vanity. A small wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. It was beautiful, clearly old, possibly something of sentimental value. But what struck him most was the lock. His wife was not a woman who kept secrets. Or at least she had never been before. He walked closer, tracing his fingers over the delicate engravings. He could feel the weight of it not just in his hands, but in his chest. A locked box was more than just a box. It was something meant to be hidden. He tested the lock gently. It did not budge. 1,000 questions flooded his mind. What could be inside? Letters? Photographs? Something from her past? The thought of opening it crossed his mind, but he pushed it away. He would not invade her privacy. But that did not stop the box from invading his thoughts. Every time he saw it, he felt a pull. A whisper at the back of his mind that grew louder with each passing day. The growing distance. His wife was still the woman he loved. She still laughed at his jokes, still reached for his hand in the evenings, still rested her head on his shoulder when they watched the sunset. But something was different. There were moments when he would catch her staring into the distance, lost in thought. When he called her name, she would blink as if shaking herself from a trance, then smile and say, "Sorry, I was just thinking." Thinking about what? She was still affectionate, still kind, but there was a slight hesitation now. A pause before she spoke. A flicker of something in her eyes before she quickly masked it. It was like she was carrying a weight too heavy to share. One night, as they lay in bed, he reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Is something wrong?" She turned to him, her expression soft, her eyes filled with something he could not quite name. "No," she said. "Everything is fine." But he knew the truth. Everything was not fine. And he was determined to find out why. The tension in the Sheikh's home had grown so thick, he could almost feel it pressing against his chest. His wife still smiled, still laughed, still played the role of a devoted partner. But there was something beneath the surface, something unspoken, something hidden. And he was tired of pretending not to notice. He had ignored the late-night calls. He had resisted the urge to open the locked box. He had brushed aside the way she flinched at certain questions, the way she seemed lost in thought when she believed no one was watching. But that night, something changed. That night, he saw the fear in her eyes. It was past midnight when he stirred from his sleep. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of a phone screen. His wife sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers moving quickly, typing out a message. The tension in her posture, the sharp rise and fall of her breath, she was nervous. She did not notice he was awake. He remained still, barely breathing as he watched her. She finished typing, hesitated, then pressed send. A second later, her phone vibrated with a reply. Her hands trembled as she read it. His heart pounded. What was she hiding? She took a deep breath, then deleted the message thread. And that was the moment he knew. Whatever this secret was, it was not small. It was not harmless. It was something she wanted erased. Something that had the power to change everything. The next day, the Sheikh could think of nothing else. Who was she talking to? Why did she delete the messages? What was she so afraid of? He tried to push the thoughts away, but they followed him. Through breakfast, through work, through the quiet moments where he caught her glancing at her phone with the same nervous expression. That night, when she finally fell asleep, he made his decision. He had never invaded her privacy before. He had always believed in trust, in respect. But this was different. This was not about curiosity, it was about truth. With careful hands he reached for her phone. His heart pounded as he unlocked the screen. And then he saw it. A name he did not recognize. A contact saved under something vague, just a single letter. He clicked it. No messages. She had deleted them all. But she had forgotten something. The call log. His breath caught as he scrolled. There were dozens of calls. Every night. The same number. The same hidden conversation. Then, at the bottom of the list, a single message she had failed to erase. A single sentence that made his blood run cold. Does he know yet? The words burned into his mind. Who was asking if he knew? Knew what? Was this about another man? A past relationship? Was she in danger? Was he? His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. He carefully placed the phone back and lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. By morning, he had made up his mind. He needed answers. His wife left the house later that day, saying she had errands to run. As soon as she was gone, he went straight to the locked box. It sat there, silent, waiting. His hands were steady as he picked it up. If this secret had the power to destroy his marriage, to shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew, then he had to face it. He searched through the house, looking for a key. Nothing. His pulse quickened. If she kept the key hidden, then whatever was inside was not just private. It was dangerous. His eyes landed on his desk drawer. Inside, he kept a set of small tools. A lockpick. He hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he knelt beside the box and carefully worked the pick into the lock. The lid lifted. And what he saw inside made his stomach drop. Letters. Old, worn, some with smudged ink from what looked like tears. He picked one up, unfolding it with trembling hands. The first words made his breath hitch. My love, I am sorry. His vision blurred as he read through the letter. A past lover. Someone she had written to again and again. Someone who spoke of a secret she had kept for years. A name. A place. Dates that did not make sense. And then the final words. One day he will find out. And when he does, I do not know if he will ever forgive me. The Sheikh's hands shook. His mind spun with questions. What had she done? What had she hidden from him? And most importantly, was their love real? Or had everything been built on a lie? The Sheikh sat in silence, staring at the letter in his hands. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the weight of the words he had just read. His wife, the woman he had given his heart to, had been hiding something from him. And now he had proof. The room around him felt smaller, suffocating. The walls seemed to press in as he struggled to make sense of it all. The unanswered calls, the deleted messages, the locked box, it all led to this moment. He heard the front door open. His wife was home. She walked in, setting her bag down as she usually did, but there was something different about her today. She seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else. She turned to him, her smile soft. "You are home early," she said. The Sheikh did not smile back. He simply held up the letter. Her face paled. The room fell into silence. For a long moment, she did not speak. She just stood there, staring at the letter in his hand, her breath quick and shallow. Finally, she whispered, "Where did you find that?" The Sheikh felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. "Does it matter?" His voice was calm, but his grip on the paper tightened. "You have been hiding something from me. Something big." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. "I can explain." "Then explain," he said, his voice firm. "Because right now, I do not know who you are anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, but he did not soften. Not yet. Not until he knew the truth. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something she had feared for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Do you really want to know the truth?" The words sent a chill down his spine. He had thought he was ready for whatever she was hiding. But the way she said it, the look in her eyes, it made him hesitate. Did he really want to know? He had come too far to turn back now. "Tell me," he said, his voice low. "No more lies." She wiped her tears, took another shaky breath, and then she spoke. And with every word, the Sheikh's world began to crumble. "I never wanted to lie to you," she began, her voice raw with emotion. "But I was afraid." He crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Afraid of what?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. She handed it to him without a word. The Sheikh looked down, his breath catching in his throat. It was a picture of her years ago. But she was not alone. Beside her stood a man he had never seen before. A man who looked at her with love in his eyes. His stomach twisted. "Who is this?" She looked at him, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "He was my husband." Silence. The word echoed in his mind. "Was." The Sheikh's heart pounded. "Was?" he repeated. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to steady herself. "He passed away." A strange mix of emotions swirled in the Sheikh's chest. He had expected betrayal, deception, but this? He looked at the letter again, the words now taking on a different meaning. "You never told me you were married before," he said, his voice quieter now. "I wanted to," she said, her voice breaking. "But I was scared. I thought if you knew, you would see me differently. You would not want me." His throat tightened. "That is not true." She let out a shaky laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You say that now. But you did not grow up where I did. You do not know what it is like to be a widow in my world." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She had carried this secret, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being abandoned. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "And the calls? The messages? The locked box?" She swallowed hard. "The calls were from his family. They still check on me sometimes." "And the box?" She bit her lip before speaking. "It has letters from him. From before he died." The Sheikh's chest ached. This was not the betrayal he had feared. This was something else entirely. She had not been hiding an affair. She had been hiding her past. For the first time since this all began, the Sheikh felt his anger begin to fade. He looked at his wife, the woman he had vowed to love, and saw the pain she had been carrying. He had spent days convinced she was deceiving him, but now he realized the truth was more complicated than he had imagined. She had loved before. And she had lost. And now, she was terrified of losing again. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You should have told me." She nodded, more tears falling. "I know. But I did not know how." He took a deep breath. The weight of the past still hung between them, but for the first time, it did not feel like a wall. It felt like something they could face together. He reached for her hand, and she gasped softly at the gesture. "You do not have to hide from me," he said. "Not anymore." A sob escaped her lips as she clutched his hand tightly, as if afraid he might let go. But he did not. Because, despite everything, he still loved her. And now, they could finally begin again. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the wind outside. The Sheikh stood frozen, his wife's words still echoing in his mind. He had braced himself for something, an affair, a betrayal, a hidden past. But what she had just told him was something he never could have imagined. His mind raced, trying to piece everything together. His wife stood in front of him, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with fear. She had finally spoken the truth, but now she was waiting for his reaction, for his judgment, for his decision. And for the first time in his life, the Sheikh had no idea what to do. What did you just say?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard, her lips quivering. "I told you the truth." The Sheikh felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. He had spent days suspecting her, nights wondering what she was hiding. And now, standing here, he almost wished he had never asked. This was not just a secret. This changed everything. His hands clenched at his sides as he struggled to process what she had just revealed. "This cannot be real," he muttered, shaking his head. "It is impossible." His wife bit her lip, her eyes filled with sadness. "I knew you would say that." The Sheikh's heart pounded in his chest. "Because it does not make sense." "How could you?" He stopped himself, unable to even form the words. She took a deep breath. "I did not want to lie to you. But I was scared. I knew this day would come, but I was never ready for it." The Sheikh ran a hand through his hair, his pulse racing. "How long?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Since before we met." He felt his chest tighten. All this time. All these years. And he never knew. Everything started to make sense now. The strange phone calls. The hidden box. The way she sometimes looked at him like she wanted to say something but never did. And then, there were the moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought, as if carrying a burden too heavy to share. He had mistaken it for guilt. But it was fear. Fear of this moment. Fear of losing him. The Sheikh inhaled sharply, his mind clouded with questions. "Does anyone else know?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "No one." His stomach twisted. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I knew you would look at me differently." The Sheikh's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to say that nothing could change the way he saw her. But could he honestly say that? His entire world had just shifted. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he loved, had been living with a truth so unbelievable, so shocking, that he could not even fully comprehend it. And now he had to decide what to do with it. His wife wiped her tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I will understand if you want to leave." His breath caught in his throat. Was that even an option? Part of him wanted to walk away, to escape this moment, to pretend he never heard the words that had just shattered his reality. But another part, one buried deep in his heart, knew that was not what he truly wanted. Because despite everything, he still loved her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. The air between them was thick with silence. The Sheikh stood motionless, his mind drowning in the weight of her confession. His wife, his beautiful, kind, and devoted wife, had just revealed something that shattered everything he thought he knew. The truth had finally come out. But now, the real question remained. What would he do next? His heart pounded in his chest, torn between anger, betrayal, and something else. Something deeper. She stood there, waiting. Her eyes were filled with fear, not of what she had just admitted, but of his reaction. Would he walk away? Would he ever look at her the same way again? She took a shaky breath. "Please, say something." But the Sheikh had no words. Not yet. His entire life had been built on control, on knowing his path. As a powerful man, decisions had always come easily. But now he was lost. He had never felt this kind of turmoil before. His mind screamed for him to leave, to turn away from the woman who had just rewritten his reality. And yet, his feet would not move. His eyes stayed on her, searching, questioning. This was not the woman he thought he married. But then, who was she? And more importantly, did it really change the love they had? His mind flashed back to their happiest moments. The way she laughed when he surprised her with roses. The nights they stayed up talking about everything and nothing. the warmth of her embrace when the world felt cold. She had been his safe place, his home. And now she was a stranger. A woman with a past so unexpected that he was still struggling to believe it. But was she really a stranger? Or was she still the same woman who had loved him unconditionally? His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Did you ever lie about loving me?" Her face crumpled. "No. Never." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You are the only thing in my life that has ever been real." The Sheikh felt something shift inside him. The truth she had hidden was devastating, shocking, but her love? That had never been a lie. And that realization made everything even more painful. Because now he had to make the hardest choice of his life. He turned away, his mind battling itself. Could he forgive her? Could he trust her again? Would he ever be able to love her without seeing the truth hanging between them? His hands clenched into fists. He could walk away. He had every right to. No one would blame him. His family, his friends, they would all say he made the right choice. Would he ever be able to live with that choice? Would he ever stop wondering what if? His breathing grew heavy as he faced the hardest reality of all. Love is not always simple. It is messy, painful, and sometimes it forces you to choose between your pride and your heart. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. She watched him with wide, tear-filled eyes, waiting for him to decide their future. Then finally he spoke. And his words changed everything. "Now tell me, what do you think he said? Did he stay? Did he leave? Would you forgive her? Let me know in the comments."